Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. Just to let you know, we're going to get started in about 5 minutes. So this is a great time. Get a drink, use the restroom. We'll get started in about 5 minutes. Thanks for being here.
Toasty too.
Yes.
So
Oh my gosh. Yeah, just a blanket, an Opera Omaha blanket.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Lauren Medici, and I'm the Director of Engagement Programs at Opera Omaha. I'm so delighted to welcome you to tonight's Opera in Conversation about X, the Life and Times, and Malcolm X. This is our third Opera in Conversation in the series, and tonight is our artist response conversation. And so this series is called Opera in Conversation for a reason. So our moderator tonight will make space for questions and participation from the audience. We do have some folks on streaming on YouTube, so hi, internet people. And so if you have a question, I'll come around with a microphone. Make sure you wait till I get to you so that everybody can hear your question. That will be a little bit later in the evening. So if this is your first Opera in Conversation, and I see some new faces, welcome. We're so glad that you're here. Tonight's conversation is about you and our artist up here thinking about this opera and giving space to process and reflect and share. So I hope that you all came ready to converse and ready to be in this space with us. We're so glad that you're here. I'm going to introduce our moderator, Dr. Diana Martinez, who is with the Union for Contemporary Art. And she, if you have been to an Opera in Conversation artist response before, she's been our moderator for this series and just does a wonderful job. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Diana.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. So down the panel, we have Celeste, Beau, and Dana, and they are our resident artists to speak to us today. And so I wanted to start off with a question at the heart of kind of like what this production is, which is like a biography, an artistic take on someone's life. And all of you work in different mediums. Celeste, you're a visual artist. Beau, you are a playwright and writer. Dana, you are a composer and musician. And I want to know, if you were tasked to make something out of someone's life, an artistic piece, what are the first things you'd do to try to capture someone's essence in your medium?
Should we take these mics off? Okay. Well, this is a place that I play in a lot in my work. I write a lot about historical Black Americans and the truth of their story. And so when I go into a project, the first thing that I look for is their humanity. The first thing that I look for is the soul underneath the story. So many times when I'm working, the people that I'm writing about have tragic ends, or the circumstance of their life, especially inside of Black American history, is tragic. So I look for the light. I look for the comedy. I look for how did they survive this, and how they found the strength to overcome. And so really it starts with the core of who the person is before we get into this larger story that everybody takes part in. I call it this this tornado, right? So the top is like the story that we all know. It's the media, it's the outward, the mythology of the person, and all the way down here is this person that the outside world has affected. So I start there and work my way up.
I think first off, I'd like to just give honor to my ancestors that came before me, and peace and reverence for all the work that they've done in their lifetime, and the blueprints that they left for us. When I'm doing my work as a visual artist, one of the layers that resonate with me the most is preservation. How can I preserve what the essence of who that person is? How can I preserve that in a manner that if somebody looked at it 1,000 years from now, 2,000 years from now, that I have preserved and honored that person in such a way that what I put as a visual artist today will resonate then. and pulling the pieces of their story and their life together in a respectful and an honorable way, and how I can weave those together with fibers and textiles and the storyline that shines them in the best of light. How can I make you shine? How can I make someone who absolutely do not know you want to take a moment and pause and do further research into why I created that piece and why it had to continue to live?
Hello. Thanks everybody for coming out. This is cool. There's a commonality with most art. I like developing the sorts of musics that sort of read like a play or an opera. I think most art starts with a vision, and then the task becomes finding all the requisite pieces to make that come alive. If I'm putting together an album, I may have 30, 40 different performers on it because every song requires a different essence. So I'm always in search of. So that's sort of how I go about creation.
How does it feel when you found it? How do you know that you've gotten to that?
You want me to answer? Sometimes you're not sure, you know? I think that's the beauty in art, even when there's no perfect art. So you're always looking to find perfection, but you never really find it. So when you create something, for me, then I'm like, all right, that represents what was in my mind. You still go away from it like, oh man, should I have done this or done that? But I think that's the beauty in art. It's like, because you can always reinterpret that idea you had, you know? And that's, for me, that's the beauty in it.
I love that you asked that question, and we all smiled. We all because it's such a beautiful moment, even if you don't have it yet. Even it's the journey that you get on, right? It's the understanding that you and either this piece that you're creating or this person that you're creating, you're on this journey together. For me, I know I'll have aha moments, right? You have that, oh my gosh, and you couldn't have gotten that at any other time than the moment you got it. So you got to go through all the pain and all the trials and tribulations until you get there. And then, especially in live theater, when I hear an audience response, when I see a tear, when I hear a gasp, I'm like, okay, we're touching it. We're on the right path. Yeah.
I like to stay in touch with the inner spirit connection. And because we spend so much time and labor intensive inside of our heads, a lot of the creation is happening in there that is developed inside of there. Even when I'm working as a visual artist, once again, in fiber and textiles or whichever media that I choose to work in, the real estate that it takes up inside there, we're up at all different types of times of the night because things hit you at different times of the day, and most of the times in the stillness of the night or the early stillness of the mornings is when something is downloaded to me, and you just get in the process in those moments. I really don't know how to articulate it or define it. It's always been a part of the process, and you just work with it and through it. It's there. It's there, the creativity, and somehow the mind's eye is downloading this information to you. And I think about Dana's work as a musician, that has to be a download to be able to key into, fine-tune, and compose pieces like that. That comes from somewhere outside of our realm.
Was there anything that you saw or that stands out to you in X, The Life and Times of Malcolm X, that was particularly inspiring to you, that you might take with you in your own practice?
I think one of the things that inspired me so much is how they interwove the little boy in him so much throughout the process. And if my memory serves me correctly, it wasn't until he didn't go with him inside the penitentiary. He didn't go inside the jail cells. That innocence was still being protected. And I know with myself and my work and my art, there is a little girl that lives inside of me that pushes me and drives me and encourages me. And she protects me as much as I protect her. So that was one of the most inspirational parts for me.
We're gonna fight over this microphone. It's a hot potato. Something that really struck me is this giant looming set piece overhead, and what that represented. A few things for me. It represented this all-seeing eye. It represented this looming oppression. It represented it's heavy and it's on top of you at all times. And when I saw the names going through that, right, and I waited to see, as I'm watching, I waited to see like, oh, there's Tamir Rice's name. So this all-seeing eye is past, present. And it didn't take me out of where we are chronologically inside of the story, but really it let me know that this story, this life of Malcolm X, he is speaking in his present from the past and into our future. And so that really brought me to a new understanding of, I think, maybe the director's intention, which is to bring this story into our present day and remind us that this ain't nothing new.
For me, there were a lot of beautiful moments I could touch on that were moving for me. Being a musician, the music really left something on me. That it is hard to meld together all those different styles, from jazz to classical. I heard everything from Coltrane to Miles Davis to Wagner to Stravinsky, and the way that it was sculpted together seamlessly to paint a picture was inspiring. I don't think people understand just how hard that is to do. You can write music that sounds complex, but it may not necessarily be emotive. And that music was dripping with emotion. So, yeah, the music score to me was absolutely incredible.
Can you talk a little bit more about that, maybe for those of us who are less musically literate? Why is it such a big deal that composer Anthony Davis is melding all of those musical forms together in one opera?
Well, for one, like I talked about, if I'm making an album and finding all the requisite pieces to make it come alive, you can write music. You also have to be able to find the perfect performers to perform that. So if you're playing something that conveys jazz and you're in the style of a John Coltrane, you have to have players that can do that, because most symphonies aren't going to have players that are going to be able to pull that off. I'm going to hear that and instantly go to, okay, I know what you're trying, but no, right? When I heard things that sounded like Bartok or sounded like Stravinsky, it was absolutely, exquisitely within the style. And then when I heard Coltrane or Miles over the top of that, or Ellington, the sophistication was on another level, you know. So it would have been hard to tell that story without a score that was that exquisite. Yeah.
Also, speaking of that story, Bo, I wanted to ask you a question kind of along the lines of what you already signaled to, that you've written about significant historical periods, you've written about Black history. Tell me a little bit about how you parse through all of the research that you do to find your own interpretation of what happened. Like, how do you begin to make your selections of what to include and what to exclude?
It's actually one of the hardest parts, because as you go down these rabbit holes of understanding and learning and educating yourself, there is just so much. And you find one thing and it leads to another thing, and you want to keep it all, because you want to disseminate all of this amazing, horrific and beautiful history to everyone as fast as you can, you know. And you don't. You get 90 minutes to 2 hours to do it, and you got to make it good and you got to make it fun. So you can't keep everything. So going back to it, I start with that person. I start with the humanity. I start with the heart. I find the relation between then and now, and I keep the audience with me, because they can see, I want to be able to tell a truth so real you can't unsee it. And if I'm playing inside of that truth, the show just kind of starts to reveal itself to me, because there are things that have to be told, and there is an urgency underneath that. And if I'm living in truth and urgency, then that's how I know that we're moving. Also, like, you know, I did a show called Red Summer about the Will Brown massacre. I did the story Buffalo Women, about Black cowgirls on the frontier who were real women. And in that show, I get to play with their voices. So we're talking like it's today, but we're living like it's back then. And that's another way that we can connect the past with today and see how far we've come and how far we haven't come. And so that also helps me keep the information that I'm telling relevant. And if I did a really good job, when you go home, you're going to be Googling it and learning all the rest on your own.
Celeste, can you help us wrap our minds a little bit around the visuals of the set design here? Was there anything that stood out to you in particular? What was the most impactful image on the stage for you?
There were several of them.
Mike, please.
There were several. So visual and impactful. I think the way the body movements flowed and moved was really relevant, and captured the essence of Black bodies taking up space, Black bodies under fear, Black bodies in trauma, and how oftentimes that is our reality and how we have to live. Trying to make sure visually, trying to make sure this man was, I want to kind of take him out of the set of this was a opera, and somehow add the humanity back into this was a man trying to protect his life, trying to protect his family, and that's the part that I want to always connect visually back to. You know, we're sitting in an opera and we're sitting in this fancy place, and and there's this storyline written about this was a man and this was his life. And because he was trying to connect and trying to unite on a global level, and you think of where we are now, present, 2023 going into 2024. I don't know where we are. 2022, 23, 24. Yeah, anyway, the T is kicking it out. This man connected globally before globally was a thing. He did it without a social media account. He did it without all the fame, the fluff, and marketing. He went single-handedly to these places to unite people. He united his own home front first because we needed it the most. But he wanted to leave a message behind that somehow we got to find a way to connect this train and unite, period. And visually, yeah. I think it was in the movement for me. The way the people moved, the way the set moved, and then collectively brought everything back together. So that was the most impactful part for me.
So you bring up for me a question that I think is just really crucial to looking at a work like this, to looking at any kind of like biographical work. And my question is, like, do you think there's a danger in mythologizing political figures or giving them this really neat character arc as if they were fictional characters? And this is open for anyone to answer.
That's a good question. As long as there is truth, as long as someone is being taught things that are real, and there's less room for interpretation of that truth, I think it's always a good thing. People are always going to tell stories. Things are always going to be magnified. Oh, back in my day. But too often, at least in American history, all the fine details are left out. So we get information on a macro level, but there's usually not enough context for someone to really develop a sense of empathy for the subject matter. So I'm fine with any story that's told as long as the truth is at the forefront of that.
Yes. I think there's a greater danger in not telling the stories at all. And so although we can't help the mythology of it, because especially as people, as artists grab onto it and they take artistic license with these real life stories, there's no control over that. In Buffalo Women, I had Biddy Mason rapping. I don't think she rapped, and I don't think she had a karaoke bar in 1865, but right, that's my artistic license. That's the way I'm telling the story and trying to stay true to that person while adding something to her mythology and giving some entertainment value to it. But I think that goes back to that idea that you may never have heard of Biddy Mason, and now you have. And now you know she even existed. And so now it's in your hands. The power is back to the audience. The power is back to you to then take it to the next level in your own lives, in your own homes, in your own researches.
Maybe she rapped. We'll never know. I wanted to go back to one image in particular that we saw throughout the opera, which is this painted backdrop of trees and mountains kind of looming behind the performers. What did y'all make of this image? What did it symbolize for you? Why was it there? at times when they were clearly not in an outdoors space?
I think for me, and I'm one of those people who love nature and always looking at trees, and I go for my early morning walks and so forth for clarity and meditation. On one of my travels to the South, and I was deeply disturbed that a lot of the trees had been cut down. And one of the tour guides at that time, I kept repeating it to the people that I was with. I'm like, these trees are awful small to be placed, for the histories that they carry. And I know the stories that those trees hold. And it's just like what we're doing now in this city is the displacement and the rearranging and taking away and adding to erasure. When those trees are cut down, there's a lot of erasure there. Those trees hold blood. They hold the blood of this nation. They hold our stories. So if you're constantly chopping them down and replacing them, you're erasing history. Some have to, by default, some do have to, they get damaged, they have to go. But when I went for miles and miles and miles in this one particular area, there were all brand new trees. And that did something to my soul. And I'll never forget that. Because I know those trees hold the stories of my ancestors.
That reminds me, I think it's funny, and I wonder how true it is for everyone, because it's something that we don't talk about. But whenever I go travel in the South, I never look at trees the same way. I never look at them like just trees. I have images in my brain that come along with that. I imagine running. I imagine lots of things that only stir up once I cross, a certain geographical boundary. And for me, I thought that this was the director's choice and the designer's choice to create that, much like that orb that was down over them, that oppression here, mountains and trees, mountains that we have to climb, and trees, whether you're in Detroit or in rural Georgia, right? Trees, lynching, city lynchings, cop killings, it's all the same, and you can't really get away from it. And so that's really what the trees represented for me, is that you can be in the middle of a major city, and you can still be, just as easily lynched, whether or not you think you're far from it or not.
The trees. You guys want the truth? That part of the show actually just kept making me think of The Sound of Music. I mean, that's real. I actually wasn't fond of the backdrop. I get the symbolism, and I could come up with a lot of things to squeeze meaning out of the backdrop. But the picture was beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this is what all our reactions are valid. That's the whole point of this discussion. But I want to go back to, the Celeste and Beau's interpretation, right? Like how those trees symbolize this really raw and real, violent history. One of the things that has been coming up for a really long time, but especially since the death of George Floyd, there's been a big discussion in film, theater, television. It's how do you tell stories about trauma, about race-based violence, about oppression responsibly without re-traumatizing Black communities. What do you think is the most important piece to creating work that is real and urgent, but not sensational?
I'm going to jump in and start on that. Again,
Yeah.
it starts with truth, right? There is discomfort in growth. And too many times, people want the growth without the discomfort, and you can't have it that way. If we really want to move the needle forward, again, I'll speak to just this country. Collectively, I think this country would like to just have an energy of, okay, can't we all just let bygones be bygones and let's move forward? It's 2022, let's just get over it. Okay, that's fine if the history that happened, if there's cause and effect. If there still was an effect today, sure, we could move on. One of the reasons we can't move on is people aren't able to contextualize and grab a real sense of empathy of what happened in this country that brings us here. I put out an album called Negro Manifesto. One of the tunes was Comfortable Discomfort. It's like I myself, and I'm African American, I've had to embrace discomfort of the truth because it is hard to look at. But you come out the other side enlightened. You come out the other side with a more sense of self, a much larger vat of empathy to draw from. And I just think everyone should embrace that. Yes, the truth hurts sometimes. Growth hurts, but you don't, there's a saying, it's, I don't know where I heard it, but it's like, everyone wants to be the hero, but no one wants to slay the dragon. It's like, you don't get one without the other.
I think it's difficult because not everybody gets the same education. Not everybody has the same starting point or entry point on where to even begin these imaginary, racial reconciliation pieces. Even in our own community, growing up in North Omaha, you don't understand, growing up in North Omaha to Millard, right? Millard is not understanding or having the same level of education of Omaha history as you do if you grew up in North Omaha. And it really hit me. I was teaching in Millard and Gretna, it's like, wow, these people are also growing up and living in Omaha, but I bet they don't know this. I bet they don't know Will Brown. I bet they don't know what 24th Street used to be, the stories that they hear about North Omaha versus what we know it is. So there's that thing. I think that's always going to be difficult. In my work, how do I not re-traumatize? I find the light. Because, so what do most people know about, the life of Will Brown or the life of Malcolm X? We know tragic endings, right? So who was this man before that tragic ending? We know horrific pictures, right? I need to put a name and a face and a sense of humor inside of that person and give that levity back to my people while also educating people who this is their entry point into that history, right? And staying on that balance beam with that. And also being intentional. How can I tell this story inside of the truth and balance that Black people have already been hearing this story? I want to give you a story that you can laugh about before you cry. And I want to give white people or people who don't know this story the opportunity to learn it in a really serious and intentional way. And that's the work.
I would have to say carefully. We carefully tell the story. but we intentionally tell the story so you understand the depth, sincerity, and the wholeness of the story. Not to try to dilute it so that it makes someone else feel good, but we want the good parts of those people to shine. So that's, the re-traumatize, not to re-traumatize, is to shine the light on the good parts, on the humanity of that person.
I have one last question for you before we open it up to the in-person audience and the Zoom audience. Kind of along the lines of that, Anthony Davis has called Malcolm X, or his characterization of Malcolm X, as one of a tragic figure. And I think throughout the opera, there's this kind of, the music, right, even is propulsive towards this inevitability of what's going to happen. How do you feel about that interpretation of Malcolm X as doomed, right, as tragic in the way that opera, the great opera heroes are?
To be honest, the opera didn't really portray the depth of tragedy with Malcolm. I think they purposely not glossed it over, but left it somewhat ambiguous, because I know the story of Malcolm X. I know how tragic it was. But if I didn't know the story of Malcolm X, I wouldn't necessarily have been left with a sense of tragedy, right? And again, I think that's maybe purposeful. But as it relates to that part of it, I was wanting more of the tragic realism of it. It's probably, opera is about that anyways, right? I thought that was a deliberate choice to end it like that, and not necessarily delve into the depth of tragedy.
I think that goes back to that part of mythologizing historical figures. And it's easy to, not easy, I won't downplay it like that, but looking back, and we know how his life ends, and we know the horror that his family went through in the beginning of his life, and all of the hurdles that he's jumped over on his way ultimately to his untimely death. But if I'm in the moment with Malcolm, does he consider himself a tragic figure? Mm-hmm. I think he considers himself a purposeful man, a man with conviction and a man with vision. And so I think that downplaying him as a tragic figure is lacking the nuance of all of the things that he ultimately was. We only know that in hindsight, but if we're living inside of his present moment, what does Malcolm have to offer us there?
Yeah. When I think of opera, oftentimes it is a slayer. Someone dies tragically. That was not played up very much. And it was a huge part of the life that he knew he was living, and it would possibly come to, because the man was haunted. So you almost know what the inevitable is, but I don't know, he'll just always be a hero in my book. I don't know too many people who can walk or live that life out, and you're being threatened every day, and your family, your children, and you're doing everything to survive and everything to. In the play, it talked about, it mentioned several times about truth. That word kept coming back up. He was living his truth. He lived his truth. Period. Yeah.
Thank you. Can we give a round of applause for our panelists? So if you have a comment or question, there's so many specifics that we didn't get into. Please, if you're in person, please raise your hand really high and wait for Lauren to get a mic to you. That's the only way our panelists can hear you, and they can hear you over there on the stream. And then Lauren will also be monitoring any questions we get.
Stream is on YouTube, so there's no questions on the stream.
Just kidding.
You only get to ask questions if you're here in person.
So raise your hand very high if you have a question.
I'm going there first, and then I'm coming back to you.
Hello. First of all, I think that you three should collaborate and create an opera. You raise a lot of artistic points and make a lot of really good points there. I'm a huge opera fan for the last 20 years or so. And as you're speaking, I was thinking that, and I particularly like more contemporary operas. I mean, I don't like going back too far in the past. So there's a lot of American contemporary operas, but even those always look to the past. So my question is, if you were going to create an opera today, which I recommend you should do, what theme would you select or topic of something that's going on today or maybe the near future to make opera very current?
I love this question.
I mean, man, if we're talking just George Floyd, how about that, right? And as far as the interpretation of Black culture, the Black experience, I mean, opera obviously is Italian, and there's a lot of stylistic choices you make because you're inside that style. Having said that, there is a lot of culture you can influence within that, even more, I think, if you chose to do that. A lot of times, classical music, even jazz music, there's always this bar that, as a composer, you're trying to uphold the integrity of the music, the history of the music. Sometimes you just got to look to the future and not really know where you're going to end up, and let that guide you. So if I were to write an opera, yeah, I would obviously use some of the tools of the idiom, but think about how I would infuse Black culture even more into the entire production, especially the music.
I would write an opera about the downfall of society, but everyone still has to go to work, and half of the cast is masked and half isn't, and there's mothers at home with screaming babies, and there's the haves and the have-nots, and the billionaires own everything, and everybody has to wear their credit score on their shirt, and it's called 2020 and Beyond, and it just incorporates all of the absolute madness, and I think in the end, a giant meteor comes at the end.
Yeah, if I was writing an opera today, I think the opera that I would want to, matter of fact, I know the opera that I would want to write would be about resilience. Because even I am beyond blown away at how many traps and snares and downfalls that are placed before us every day. opportunities and lost opportunities. And somehow, something from a place higher than where we sit gives us the strength to get up the next day to do it again and win. I want to know, I want to see that opera because there's something innately in us and all the hells and atrocities that we've been through. And we're set, and the dial is set for destruction. Trauma, brutalization, financial wars, everything. And somehow we find the strength to get up every day. Contrary to popular belief that we're losers and failures and all the things that media paints before the world's eye, and we do the dang thing with class, dignity, and respect. I want to see that opera.
I have two questions. My first is, I sat and watched the opera just as a person in the audience, but you watched the opera knowing you were going to be on this panel. How did that influence how you experienced the opera?
No difference for me. I do a lot of public speaking. I mean, people usually want to hear my critical opinion, and I've got a lot of them. Yeah, I'm sure they're going to say, as an artist, you can only watch it and receive it the same way. You can't, okay, I know I'm going to be speaking on a panel. So now there were definitely things that I thought about, okay, if I thought that part sucked, do I say it sucked? I might have thought about some of it. Nothing sucked, by the way. But yeah, the process of digesting art is the same.
Mm-hmm. The same for me too. I go in, I can't turn off the artist's eye, and but the artist's eye still serves the audience eye. So I'm just there as a person taking it in and just receiving what the art is telling me, and then it's really in the days afterward that I start thinking about the effects that the piece had on me.
Yeah, my mind goes back to being a little girl and just knowing just a couple of blocks from where I grew up that Malcolm X's house was on that street. So that blows me away more than anything. And I'll take that with me forever, that I walked on those streets where his house was, where his parents was. I played on those streets. And that's the influence for me, and that's what I take with me. I hold no hurt, no harm, no danger for nobody, only self-defense if necessary. But that's where that lives. It lives as a creative piece. And yeah, I'd like to see it keep growing and get bigger and better. I think Omaha was a great place to bring it and launch it for its second time. But I definitely, as far as a critique or anything like that, I like to see, I just like to see it get better. I like to see it in its finest after it's ran several shows, and just fine tune it.
We have time for a couple more questions, I think.
So I liked your comment about the white people in Millard and Gretna, because that's where my family lives. I had a lot of people come to mind. I thought about this being written in 36 years ago, and some of the things that were said now, I think were strong for some white people to hear. But if it were written today, how much stronger do you think it could have been?
Things are strong. Well, strong is relative. I think a lot of things are hard for certain generations, not with young people. They always get it, right? I'll never forget when a lot of the riots started, And I was driving, and my assistant, David, called me, man, they're down here on Dodge, and it's crazy. I was like, well, really? I'm not far from it. Let me ride over there. So I went and parked, and I walked over to Dodge Street in 72nd. And I get over there, and I see all these white people, young white people. I'm like, oh, shit, I came to the wrong side. How am I gonna, this is crazy. And then I'm like, wait a minute. What the? Then I realized these young white people were fighting for justice. These young white people weren't shackled by history that wasn't real. They could see for themselves what it was. They were no longer falling for that, right? And that was powerful for me. So I agree it is hard to hear things for certain people, but for others, it's not so hard, right? Yeah.
I think that was kind of the thing that the director was maybe addressing when he was using the current names, bringing it into today's, right? Like that's how you keep it fresh. That's how you keep it relevant. I don't think that the things that were true in 1986 are still true today, and the things that were true in 1963 are still true today, and then add some more flavor on top of that. So I don't think that it would have to, I don't think to write the play 36 years later, you would have to like have it be more heavy-handed. I just think you might have a little bit more material to work with. But the story of Malcolm X by 1986 was already complete. So it's complete then and it's complete today. And so I think just moving forward, it's finding ways to keep the story relevant, but it's also a timeless story that will unfortunately always be relevant.
And I'm not quite sure if I heard your question all the way, so if you don't mind repeating it.
If this was written today instead of 36 years ago, do you think it would have been written with a stronger message or stronger language?
I think I have to give credit where credit is due. That creative freedom goes a long ways in the creative process. And nothing but kudos to something that was written, not, especially for Black people, opera was not something that was written in our voice or our language. So it's in our language now, the conversion. And I think it needs to live exactly where it is.
One more question?
Did you have one? That was the question. Okay, hold on. Down here.
You guys were absolutely fantastic tonight. I loved your interpretation. I was sitting up in the luge with my wife, and we've been to several operas, and they've always been in a different language, and they've had the translation up on there because they're singing in Italian and German and French, and that's amazing what they can sing in those languages. Then they have to translate it. What bothered me was that they still had English up in the translation, and I think that it could have been a little more powerful in just watching the singers and see their emotion come through. I'm also a musician, and so your emotion comes through that. So that's the only thing that bothered me about the play, is that I was distracted a little bit from the stage. I loved everything about the scenery and all the graphics, but if you were to write this in a different language, what language would you do that in?
Because so many languages and dialects were stolen and taken from us that we'll never be able to go back and capture. I would love to know what those languages is so that I today could speak them, and I would have it written in one of those languages.
I would absolutely keep the play in English because it's an American story. It is a Black American story, and that is the language that his life was lived in. So I think that's the most true.
What I tried to do was not look up at the words and see how much I could just catch. And I actually was able to catch a lot. A lot of times when you see that up there, you just want to watch it and keep watching it. But I tried to disengage from that. And if I had to look, but I found that most of the time I could understand most of it, at least the emotion, the emotional intent. Sometimes I didn't have to necessarily know exactly what they were saying, and I still got it.
Please let's give thanks again to Celeste Butler, Bo Berry, and Dana Murray for joining us today.
Thank you so much to joining us, and thank you to Diana for moderating this wonderful conversation and our artists. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your questions. We are not done with X events quite yet. So tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, if you'd like to join us at North Omaha Music and Arts, we'll be doing a public masterclass with Joshua Conyers, who played Reginald in the opera. He's with us this week doing a number of artist residency visits. And on Sunday, if you'd like to join us at Gallery 1516 at 11:30 for a free concert as part of their Bagels and Sometimes Bach series, Joshua will be doing a concert with our head of music, Sean Kelly. I've heard them rehearsing. It's going to be fabulous on Sunday morning. So those will be our last two public events for X. And like Bo encouraged, if you have not yet been to the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation and the birth site here in Omaha, please make sure to go, book a tour, get the full experience. That's a great place to find out more if, like Bo encouraged, this opera is what sparked your interest to dive in and research more, as I hope that it did. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and I hope we'll see you later this week. If we don't see you later this week, we will be back in February for Suor Angelica, and I hope we'll see you then. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.